Our next speaker is Rocco Forte. Rocco is the retired fire chief and director of emergency preparedness former director of emergency preparedness for the city of Minneapolis. I've seen Rocco speak a couple of times. I think last time I met him was at CDP in Anniston, and I was really impressed with his understanding of how things should work together and what we can do to coordinate between the different agencies when we have a really unexpected disaster occur. With that, Rock.
Morning. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. I always like to start with this logo that we have for the city of Minneapolis, where it has the big red EP, emergency preparedness, basically because of those 3 stars. Those 3 stars stand for local, state, and federal government. And when you find yourself in a large emergency, you're definitely going to need resources from all 3 of those areas. So you have to learn how to navigate through those different agencies as quickly as you can. And the best way to do that is the National Incident Management System. I appreciate the opportunity to talk today about an incident that we had in Minneapolis in 2007. It was August 1st of 2007, we had a bridge collapse. But I want to go back just a little bit further than that, about 5 or 6 years earlier. This is considered from FEMA a successful response to a disaster based on the limited loss of life that we had and the fact that no first responders were hurt, and we used the National Incident Management System. But 5 years earlier, we couldn't have said that. We basically rewrote our emergency operations plans like most communities do, and we had an excellent emergency operations plan. I know it was excellent because I wrote it and I stole it from best practices from everywhere around the country. The only problem we had is we couldn't implement it. We did not have the skills, knowledge, and ability, our trained personnel, to do that. So we basically went out to Mount Weather, Virginia. We put about 80 people on a plane and flew out there about 1,000 miles from Minnesota. And we spent 3 days in an integrated management course to walk us through different disasters. And quite frankly, we failed miserably. We came back, and from March to July of 2002, we put a 5-year training plan together. We implemented that training plan. We finished it in July 2007. The bridge collapsed 1 month later. Quite frankly, we were at the top of our game. But this is the bridge collapse itself. The day the bridge collapsed, there were 111 vehicles and 190 people on the bridge. Normally, there's 5 times that many, but the bridge was down from 8 lanes to 2 lanes based on the fact that there was construction on the bridge at that time. The bridge itself is 40 years old. It's about 1 mile long, about 3/4 miles over water, about 100 feet or 10 stories from the top of the bridge to the water. The water is usually about 15 feet deep there. It was about 18 to 20 feet deep at that point in time. That's what's happened to the bridge. It took about 1.5 minutes for it to collapse. Now those 111 vehicles and those 190 people are either under the water, in the water, on the banks of the river, or in the debris of the bridge. So we had basically every type of recovery or victims in every type of problem they could have. Now I'm just going to quickly show you a video. It's about 10 minutes. Hopefully if this works out correctly. This is from the first responders' perspective.
People are all over the place. Everything you've got, the whole bridge over the river fell down. There's cars all over the place.
911.
Yes, I was on the bridge that just collapsed. I'm on like a little island part in the middle. There's a lot of people here too, and I think there could be people trapped in cars is what I'm really worried about.
Call came over, bridge down at the U of M.
The bridge collapsed. Fire in place.
Well, at that point in time, I don't think I really believed it. It's not something that you hear every day.
We have construction workers, cars all over, and people in the water as well.
We had just finished eating and my phone rang.
I was really unable, I think, to understand the totality of it.
Fire in a vehicle on the collapsed bridge, and the only way they're going to be able to get at it.
So I ran back to my car as quickly as I could and then came down to City Hall, where our emergency operations center is.
My driver immediately just slammed down the brakes.
It was surreal, and it was like, you're like, this can't be real. I gotta be sleeping, or it's a bad dream, or...
My breath was taken away when I looked across.
It was just incomprehensible.
And this incredible concrete and steel structure that is supposed to stand up through all time was just twisted like a kid had thrown it down and broke it. It was from there that I could see the school bus, and my heart kind of sank when I saw that.
My idea was check the cars that were submerged. Got to the edge of the water, took out my turnoffs, put the Gumby suit on, got tied off, jumped in the water.
At the time, we had at least 5 people still trapped in vehicles. I started to take an inventory as to who was hurt, in what fashion, how they were hurt.
We used the wreckage as a crossing path to that bridge deck, crossing a span of open water, and it was very difficult and tenuous to get to.
I'm in my car. There's people out here. They got the door open, but I'm not moving because my back is in a lot of pain right now.
The 911 volume was probably about 3 times the normal amount.
There's too many phones being used, and I can't.
I knew what I was supposed to do, and the good news was pretty much everyone else knew that too, because we'd prepared enough.
People were coming in and knowing the people that were involved and all the training they had that was kicking in.
The EOC's role is to get that group operating on the scene anything they need, equipment, people, food, whatever it is.
In our EOC, there's police, fire, public health, public works, up to people that you wouldn't think of, finance and public information folks.
That crew around that table answered hundreds of questions in a real-time way and had to kind of tap into their own knowledge of what needed to happen to get things done and to serve that front line.
Ricky, what's going on down at the dive site?
The fact that we were able to have portable cameras on site that brought the visions that the first responders were seeing into the EOC helped us make decisions for them.
And the Emergency Operations Center had control of the cameras, so they could pan, tilt, and zoom the cameras into whatever area they needed to see at the moment.
If you need anything at all, give me a call.
So that's what the Emergency Operations Center does. It constantly identifies the resources that are needed, and then we go through either our city, county, state, or federal government to bring those resources, get them on site, and get the job done.
I was the first one on 10th Avenue Bridge, and I think my original report was that we had a major disaster.
Approximately 30-plus cars that I can see at this time.
We initially established command like we always do and started dividing up work among the command staff. This particular incident just required a lot more people.
And here we had a federal bridge maintained by the state, fell into a county river with the city of Minneapolis on both sides. So it was very complicated. And the key to being successful was having unified command, having 3 incident commanders, one from the fire department, one from the police department, and one from the county sheriffs, so they could focus on just their part of the emergency.
Got to the 10th Avenue Bridge where we established command. I could not talk to police, I could not talk to EMS, I could not have talked to other agencies without having a unified command structure. It helps us to gain control and to gather up and to effectively manage an incident of this size.
The fire department was the unified incident commander, and we started taking some of the law enforcement issues like cause and scene security to preserve evidence and to make sure no one else got hurt by entering an area we didn't want them to enter.
We rescued over 50 people in the first 90 minutes and got them on the way to the hospital, which was great work, not only by firefighters, but law enforcement and the public.
Public Works' really first job during those first few hours was to assist in the rescue operation. We had to secure some of the roadways immediately adjacent to the collapse.
As the police and fire department set up the incident command site, it was critical to get absolute information to them on a real-time basis. So we actually set up a GIS, Geographic Information Services, office right there side by side with the police and fire command.
We had every one of our department staff
plus staff from other departments answering media calls.
The national and international media was incredible, how fast it was on our doorstep and how demanding they were going to be, as well as how many of them there were.
We had, 200,000 people who come into downtown every day, and one of the three main ways they get to downtown is out. So how do you get that kind of practical information at the same time you're managing this national and international message?
As time went on, you start getting a smaller list of potential victims.
There were people coming to the Family Assistance Center who were just looking for a place to figure out if their relative had been sent to a hospital, if they were all right, to connect with one another.
We literally had teams of investigators who had to go out on hundreds of reports and locate people.
There are still 20 to 30 people considered missing tonight. I just spoke
And within a couple days, we were sure that we had 8 missing people for sure that were on the bridge, as well as the original 5 that we knew had died that night.
Those families had a special need for support from one another, and for psychological first aid from professionals.
The last number I heard is that we were close to about 170 agencies overall for the whole thing, which is incredible.
It wasn't about, hey, I'm in charge. It was about what work needs to be done. Initially rescue, after that scene security, and then recovery, and now building a bridge.
Mount weather played a huge role. 5 years ago, the fire department put in for a grant through FEMA, through the federal government, to take about 80 of our people from the city of Minneapolis, the county and the state, to Mount Weather, Virginia.
And we put ourselves through some simulated disasters.
It was a very daunting 3 days.
We could only use our emergency operation plans and the resources we had at the time. And we did not do well.
I saw in that case what our strengths and our weaknesses were. We addressed those, and we were ready.
And the training that we've actually been putting into that really paid off.
I believed that the investments that we had already been beginning to make for 800 megahertz were, after 9/11, proved to be extremely valuable investments.
But just the mere ability to interoperate between police, fire, and EMS, as well as Minneapolis to other agencies, is the real big advantage of 800 megahertz.
If this would have happened 5 years ago, it would have taken 48 to 72 hours to get a collapse structure team on site. Our collapse structure team was there in 8 minutes.
Well, I think something pretty clearly was demonstrated in all of this, and it's the fact that when you invest in quality government, you get quality results, and when you don't, there are consequences.
People across the country would say, what a great job you did, Minneapolis. And to me, the word that I used was proud. I was so proud of our city.
One of the things I did when I took this job was to bring pride to the patch, and you couldn't ask for a better response.
For members of a national audience who don't know life in the Twin Cities, what have you got here that's going to get you through what you need to get through?
At least in the Twin Cities area, we got the Midwestern, the Minnesota nice. We got a lot of that, and so like last night, I didn't have to ask; they just came, and that's probably the. You got some good people here.
Yeah.
And you're going to need them.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll leave it to someone else to critique and to say how we did, but I have to say that had to be the proudest moment of my life on that job. The people that I worked with, the paramedics, policemen, the civilians, everyone there, I tell you, it absolutely reinforced my faith in humanity.
Thank you. That was the view of from the responders after the 5 years of training together and building those relationships. That was, again, let's get back to this. This was a federal bridge that was maintained by the state that fell into a county river with the city of Minneapolis on both sides. In reality, the city of Minneapolis had 4 victims that were involved in this. Everyone else was in someone else's jurisdiction. But quite frankly, because of the fact that we're a NIMS compliant, a National Incident Management System compliant city, county, and state, none of these jurisdictional issues matter. What matters is who has the most resources to successfully be in charge. And basically the way you determine that is you have to break a disaster up into multiple incidents. You have to look at what you have and to determine what your command structure is going to be. Here we had a collapsed structure. The bridge collapsed into the river. And quite frankly, we never, ever practiced for a collapsed bridge. That's where resiliency comes into place. Once you have basic skill sets, you can apply them to just about any incident that happens. Second, we had a hazmat incident. Actually, we had 2. I'm not sure if you noticed, but when the bridge collapsed, it collapsed into trains, and the trains had product leaking. The product was styrene, which is nothing to be concerned about, but 6 cars back was chlorine. If it would have hit that, we'd have a whole completely different conversation. Plus, when the bridge collapsed, it compromised the integrity of one of the buildings on the north side of the river on the University of Minnesota campus, which had 900 pounds of mercury and nuclear material in it. And where else would you store that except uphill over a river? Then we had to deal with fire and extrications. The fire department, as you can see by those tapes, those fires were very unique in the sense that the people that were trapped in their car are trapped in debris. They were now experiencing the radiant heat that was coming from those vehicles. We're also concerned that if one of the vehicles exploded, we could have a secondary collapse of the bridge itself. And there was no way for the firefighters just to drive up and put the water on the fire. So they had to deal with that. Emergency medical services. At the time, we didn't know there were 190 people on the bridge. We had to basically go through and identify the victims. But 121 of the individuals had to be triaged, treated, and transported. Once we identified them and what their injuries were, we had to put them on backboards and either maneuver up the sides of the bank of the river to get them on an ambulance, or maneuver them down the banks of the rivers to get them on a boat in the river to get them to an ambulance. So it's very resource intensive. And then the crime scene itself, remember this bridge just fell. We got a very large Somalian population in Minnesota. In fact, it's the largest in the United States. We knew through intelligence that a certain percentage of those individuals, at least 30, had gone back to Somalia for bomb schools. So we were very concerned to the fact that this may be a terrorism attack, and we had to treat the scene that way and put a perimeter up. And then we had our water issues. When the bridge collapsed, any cars that were going over 55 miles an hour managed to get under the bridge, and the bridge collapsed on top of them. So we had individuals under the water as well as individuals on the side of the water, and our county divers had to deal with those issues. So with all those basically issues we had, most of them were fire department related, so at least for the first stage, the fire department was in charge. And we had a mutual aid with other departments to get enough people to have the skill sets in that could handle all these issues. Road to nowhere very quickly. When we mutual aided, we had over 30 other fire departments come into Minneapolis. They took the wrong turn down into the river gorge, and they went down a one-way street where nobody could turn around. So we had all of our first responders about a mile away, and they all had to walk back with their equipment to work. Lessons learned, make sure you communicate better. Triage, as I said, we had a triage, treat, and transport the 121 victims, and again, it was very resource intensive. But once we did transport them to an ambulance, we did an excellent job of getting them to the ambulance, and under our mutual aid agreements, we had different ambulance companies, and we had 5 hospitals in our compact, and we did an extremely good job of identifying what the injuries were, talking to the hospitals, and getting to the patients to the hospital that could meet their needs. What we did a poor job of was tracking the individuals, and it took us days to figure out where all of them were. I talked about the crime scene, but this is kind of interesting where I have weapons. If you look at any of these pictures, you'll never see one of the police officers with their weapons on. When they originally came into the site, they come up on the top of the banks of the river, they work their way down the banks of the river, and they realize they may have to go in and save some people in the water. So they all took their weapons off and put them in a pile. The only problem was they didn't keep anybody in charge of that pile. As I was in the EOC, and one of the first calls we got is, there's about 80 weapons here. Is there anything you think we should do with them? Cascading events, when you get out of doing what you normally do, you tend to make mistakes. This was very interesting. Our county sheriffs handle all the water in lakes and rivers in Minneapolis and Minnesota in general. And they're trained for body recovery or to help people that are drowning. But this was a collapsed structure. We needed salvage divers that could go under, cut through the concrete and rebar, and free those 13 or 14 cars that we had under the water. So in order to do that, we needed Navy divers who are the best in the world. Again, we used the National Incident Management System. Through the city, county, state, told them we needed Navy divers to do the salvage for us. We had them on site within 16 hours. They did a phenomenal job. They basically went down with torches, and they cut through concrete rebar. They would put the cars that were underwater on chains. We'd pull them out with the crane, put it on a flatbed truck, take it to a fire station, and extricate the victims. There's the bridge itself. I just wanted to very quickly talk about this helicopter. One of the problems we had right off the bat in this river gorge is that the news helicopters were coming down into the gorge so they could get stories and get as close film coverage as they could. Well, the incident commander called back and said, we got so many helicopters in here that they're splashing water up on our first responders. I'm afraid they're going to crash into each other, and we're having all kinds of problems with them. So from the EOC, we called up the news people and asked them if they could get the helicopters out. They basically put a lawyer on the line and talked to us about First Amendment rights. So our second call was to the military, who sent a Black Hawk helicopter over and told them they had 5 minutes to leave or they'd shoot them down, and they all left. This is just some of what we had to fall. Remember when that bridge fell, it fell 100 feet down into there, so anybody that's left in there has some type of back injury, fractures, or hurt in some way. This was interesting. We worked, because the water was 18 to 20 feet deep and we couldn't get to the victims that were under the bridge, we worked with the Army Corps of Engineers to go back 3 or 4 dams and drop the water, so we got it down to 4 or 5 feet. Then we really started to be concerned because we identified that there were 13 or 14 cars under the bridge, and when we did this, we had 28 cars in the area. Fortunately, most of them were ones that from crimes that were committed over the last 20 years, and they drove the car into the river, so we solved a lot of crime. This is the part I was telling you about. We would put a crane on and wrap the cars out, and they'd bring them up, put them on a flatbed truck. The only problem is the only place we could put the crane to swing it was over that building that had the mercury and nuclear material in it. So we had to stop this and move all that material out to a different site. Cascading events, things are always happening. You know, I got to get through this very quickly. So this is what really worked for us. We implemented our emergency operations, we activated our emergency operations center, implemented NIMS. That sounds hard, but it's very simple. You do that with your incident action plan, and if anybody likes it or not, the first phase of your incident action plan is your standing operating procedures. People are going to respond the way you teach them. Your second period, you may be able to get an instant action plan out. So what we did is very quickly, we talked to the ICs and we agreed on what our plan would be, who was going to be in charge and who was going to be supportive. Also in our Emergency Operations Center, we had the 10 disciplines from that NIMS recommends, state and county representatives, University of Minnesota, because we had the hazardous material with them. Elected officials, do you need elected officials in your EOC? Only if they're trained. If they're not trained, get them out of there. And basically the reason you need that, those are your resources, and you want to get your resources as soon as you can. This is very quickly how we put our command system together. The incident command was unified under the fire department, who had the emergency medical services, the fire suppression and collapse structure, and I cannot say enough about the work that collapse structure team did. Without them, we probably would be talking about 50 to 60 deaths rather than 13. Then the the police department had the crime scene, the perimeter on land. County sheriffs had their divers, the Navy divers, and the perimeter on water. The EOC basically worked with operations in the field. They did the planning for the next operational period. They did the logistics for the next operational period, and they followed finance. One thing I would say, if you have not trained people in NIMS in all the different areas, make sure that you train somebody in finance. Because if you have a retired or light-duty firefighter, cop, or somebody else like that, FEMA is really hard to deal with reimbursement. If you learn how to do it right, we are reimbursed 99.5% of our investment. I tell everybody, if you have a disaster, these people are going to show up. This is our mayor, R.T. Ryback, the Governor Pawlenty, and obviously George Bush. They're going to come and see what you've done, so you might as well do your job right, because they're going to pick it apart, and you're going to be up in front of the media and do all those things. When I had an opportunity at the site to meet with the president, obviously it wasn't himself, but his crew had told him through reports what an excellent job we did following the NIMS presentation, and he was congratulating me in this picture about what a good job we did. That's the first time I really started to worry, because I remember in Katrina, you did a good job, Brownie, and they fired him the next day. But to be fair, he did send a letter to us, which I'm very proud of, which he signed, of what a good job we did in Minneapolis. And I'm going to leave with this, this last slide. If you remember nothing else, and it's pretty much the theme we've been talking about right here. It's those diamonds there, relationships, relationships, relationships. There was not one area where I dealt with somebody during that emergency where I haven't met them from a tabletop training or some type of experience. And when you can look at somebody that you know and trust and hand a problem off to them, you don't have to deal with it again. You know it's going to be done, it's going to be done right. So A, you need those relationships. B, you need some type of communication systems where you can talk to each other. With us, it was 800 megahertz radios, but you have to have a communication system where you can talk to various disciplines. Then planning, and when I put planning in there, you have to be brutally honest. Not just did you write a plan, but can you implement that plan? If you do a gap analysis of that, it's going to lead to equipment and training. Once you identify what that equipment and training is, train with other people from other disciplines and other communities that will reach back to that relationships piece. Carl, I did it exactly on time.
Yeah, great job.
Okay.
I think we have time for a couple questions. Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. I'm Victoria Hart from the Center for Excellence in Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance. I think we're all really struck by the successful coordination across multiple jurisdictions. And you also mentioned 5 years prior to the incident, the emergency exercise and planning that got started. How many levels did that planning incorporate? You know, city,
all levels.
county, state, okay.
If I could, we basically went through our emergency operations plan, and we did a gap analysis of what training needs there were, and they were anywhere from awareness to operations, performance, to management. That's where we came up with the elected officials can't go into the EOC unless they're trained. You need only trained people in there. We also did something unique. None of the courses that we had, and 95% of them came from the consortium, the training that we had, which is almost all free. But we would only have 70% of the participants could be from the city of Minneapolis. The others had to be from someplace else that we mutual aided with. That's how we built those relationships. But without that 5-year plan, we would have done very poorly. That'd be my biggest, I would tell anybody, if you can, do a gap analysis and close those gaps as soon as you can.
Yes, Suzanne Frew. I have a question. First off, excellent video, really good depiction of what happened. This was a real watershed event in the world of social media, because this was one of the first real documented case studies of how citizen journalism really impacted the way news was brought to the city and the way it went out and the way people communicated with each other outside of the city. What I'm wondering is, in your hot wash, in looking at what happened later, have you, what happened in looking back into using social media or cell phones or things like that for your communication with the outside world away from your immediate vicinity?
Very quickly, I'll tell you something about cell phones, and I'll get back to the other part. Our cell phone system went down, and I get to take responsibility for that. We had a game at the Twin Stadium, which is about 6 blocks from the bridge collapse, a baseball game with about 40,000 people at the game. We had already been working with them to move traffic away from the bridge when the game let out, and when they came and they used mapping to show us where most of the phone calls were coming from, and they were coming from the Twin Stadium. So I called over there as emergency manager and asked them to ask their people to quit using their cell phones. And the minute we did that, everybody pulled out their cell phone to make the last call, and it crashed the whole system. So you have to be aware of that. But the other part of your question is part of the fact that we were going through all phases of training. We knew that we had a real deficit with our public information officers, and how we got information out. So in that 5 years, we actually put plans together for that, and people worked together on that. So we actually had plans to get things out on different, whatever social media events we had, and we just implemented